right, it's 12 o'clock, and you're hearing Prince. I do not own the rights to any of this music. I think that's what we're supposed to say whenever we use music that we're not paying for. So I do not own the rights to any Prince music. I'd be you'd be hard pressed to find someone who does own the rights to Prince music these days. All right, so we are gonna have some fun today. There's a lot to talk about. Getting everything set up for you, and we're gonna jump right in. All right, let me get back to my screen. I hope everybody has a good time. Hi, Krista. Hello, Michelle. Yes, I know they're gonna mute me, and so that's why I'm gonna cut it off right now, very unceremoniously. All right. It's 12 o'clock. You just got listening to we just got listening to the music of Prince, and that means that you are on the Greenhouse Effect. Eris, how are you, my friend? All right. Today we have a lot of stuff to do. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, and we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna do some important stuff, and then we'll circle back to a new piece that I've written for Black Lives Matter. It's called Zoom America. Some of you might have seen it, and they can't mute the great Hayden Greene. Yeah, no, they can absolutely mute me, which is funny because that's the point of the piece. Anyhow, so at the end of the hour, we're going to talk about I'm going to read that piece out loud. So for those of you who have been reading the words or seeing the video, you'll get to hear me do it, perform it, so to speak. So there's a lot to talk about. One of the things that we will talk about today is defunding the police, and what does that really mean? Because I feel like everybody is up in their feelings about defunding, and I think that it's getting a bad rap because people don't understand what defunding means. So I'll attempt to break it down a little bit for everybody, and people can comment in the chat where I've gone aside. But I want to talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter being painted on the street in D.C., which is amazing. But at the same time, it is not going to do anything unless, well, you get the point. So anyway, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the legislation that the New York City has passed. That New York City has passed, and that the Congress is trying to pass and has put up. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of places to go, and in between all of that, we will get the poetry of Will Dennis. He is an amazing poet. He also happens to be a member of Phi Beta Sigma. Two of those things are both amazing, and so we wanna get his poetry in here. So I'll be pulling him in somewhere around the 20-minute mark, and so hopefully y'all stick around for that. Will's on the chat as well, so you can give him a wave and talk to him there. So where do we start? I think we have to start at the beginning, and we have to talk about all the different things that have been happening since the last time that we came together. We have had what is it? I think 14 days of straight protesting, 14 days of protests since the last time that we spoke. Well, I mean, 7 days more. And it is not losing steam. In fact, it is picking up steam. And I have to say that I am truly impressed. Even though we are quarantined and people are not at work or at work but they're home, I am really, really impressed by how long this is going on, how people says that how long people have gotten out there and said, we're not going to relinquish the hold of your attention, and we're going to keep on going until you give us what we want. And that's one of the things that's really interesting, right? Because we are we as a nation are actually sitting in a lot of sitting in a really a cauldron of influence right now, right? So there's so much that can come from all of this because nobody's letting up, nobody is done with this conversation, and people are not going to let you forget it. So I have this whole thing about the way people forget things really quickly, um, and I want to make sure that it stays in people's mindset. So I think that this is a really good sign that we're going to hear about this for a very, very long time. There are some really interesting things that are happening. The last one that I saw was that NASCAR is not going to allow people to have the Confederate flag flown at their events. Somebody said, well, if they don't allow the Confederate flag, well, who will show up? And that's a gamble that they're willing to take, right? So they're thinking now is the time to do this. First of all, they're running their races with nobody in the stands. So if they're going to alienate anybody, if they're going to make this move, it'll be now, right? And they're going to have a Black Lives Matter car that is running. That is going to really that's going to be really interesting. So that's again a bit of a bit of sprinklings as to, oh, here we go. Here's some things that we can do ourselves. Everybody's coming out with a statement. Everybody's trying to make sure that they get on the bandwagon. And that's the part that we now have to be careful about, because there will be a lot of people who are like, oh my crap, our company didn't put out a statement. Our people, didn't say anything. And so everybody's trying to do something to make sure that they're a part of this movement. And you're seeing small things like NASCAR getting rid of a flag of a defeated army, and for the most part, a treasonous act in this country. I think that makes sense. Krista says that it's long overdue. Uh, yeah, so Bubba came out with he came in 11th with the BLM car, and so that's one little thing. Then you have big things like the mayor of DC, put Black Lives Matter, painted Black Lives Matter down the street that leads into the White House. So it's like directly. So when you take an aerial photograph, and if you look at my Facebook page, my cover photo is that photograph. If you take an aerial photograph, it leads directly to the White House, which is great. And there are going to be people like, this is a misappropriation of city funds. I was like, yeah, there's a ton of other misappropriated city funds that you could really talk about. And then, but then you're going to talk about, well, are there other causes? And I want to come back to, are there other causes? Because that's a red herring that we have got to stop buying into. But I just think that people are trying to step up and do the most, right? So you've got the mayor of DC painting Black Lives Matter all throughout, all down the street and in huge letters. You now have the mayor of New York City, right? And he's now saying that he's going to paint Black Lives Matter on 5 different streets in each of the boroughs. I'd like to see how that goes over in Staten Island, but that's another story altogether. Yes, she also changed the name of the street to Black Lives Matter Way. In fact, speaking of changing the street names, there is actually a petition to change the name of the block upon which Trump Towers sits here in New York City to Barack Obama Way. I think he would have an aneurysm. I think he would just literally have his head explode right there in the Oval Office if that went. So yeah, you're right. Congress has been looting tax money for years. So if we're taking a couple of extra tax dollars to put to signify that enough is enough, then I'm all for it. I'm definitely all for it. And then we have what happened in Congress last week with Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the congressmen wearing kente cloth stoles to signify that they are in that they're in support and solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't know. So the Congressional Black Caucus was in on this, right? They were the people who were part and parcel of having this happen, and so you kind of almost get the rubber stamp that this is okay. I'm here to tell you that that was not okay. That just was not okay. They could have gone in so many different ways. They could have worn a kente cloth ribbon. They could have worn a pin that says Black Lives Matter. They could have worn a little something small. But the whole kente cloth graduation stole was absolutely ridiculous. It was it was it was just so ridiculous. And Dunn says there were no real people, no real black people who really could stand up and told them that wasn't the way to go. But I don't even believe that. I just think that there gets to be a point where people are so focused on trying to make a symbol and trying to make sure that everybody knows that they're one of the good ones, that they're one of the good peoples. And I'm not just talking about they're one of the good white people. I'm just talking about one of the good people altogether. And like having these symbols stand out, that the message gets lost in the symbolism. And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. And then they all knelt down in formation and for the moment of silence. So here's the thing, right? Just the week before, we had a huge brouhaha about Donald Trump going to the church to stand in front of the church and hold the Bible as part of a photo op. And then a week later, you're doing a photo op with kente cloth kneeling down in the foyer. Who are their people? Is nobody around to be like, yeah, I don't know that this is a good idea. And if you saw the after effect, Nancy Pelosi couldn't even get back up. Nancy Pelosi's knees do not work. They absolutely do not work. And you're right. Desiree says, I'm curious as to, why the Congressional Black Caucus suggested that they do that. And I think that on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. We're all going to kneel in support. I think that standing in quiet, in silence, even if you were standing in that formation, would have been exactly the same effect, right? Just stand. But the whole kneeling is just so performative. And it was very much, look at me, look at me, look at me. Yes, exactly. I said performative, and then I looked down, and Will said the exact same thing. And so, y'all are not performers. Y'all are not spoken. Y'all are not artists. Y'all are not. Y'all not about to drop an album. Y'all are not about to do a spoken word piece. Y'all not about to do a step show, although I did see I saw a meme that said they look like they're about to do the baddest step show in Washington, D.C. I said, my senators, yeah, we'll look. Anyway, so I think that people need to focus on what they can actually do and leave the theatrics to leave the theatrics to other people. And it completely took away from the fact that they were out there trying to pass some really serious legislation. Is it the be all to end all? No. I think that there are many other things that need to happen, but it is a start. But they were out there trying to get this passed and putting forward this legislation, trying to get it passed through the House and highly unlikely through the Senate. But that's what the business that they were there for. But nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about what was in that bill. Nobody's talking about how that bill might help the black community or this nation as a whole. Nobody's talking about that. All they're talking about is the kente clause. All you're seeing is 3 or 4 images from people wearing these stoles, and they're not talking about raise your hand if you got a copy of the bill or have a good understanding of what they were going to pass. And that's exactly the problem. The problem is that now we're talking about the performative stuff and we're not talking about the substantive stuff. And that's a real issue. So it's infuriating, because again, it's one of those things where people want to do the most and when people want to try to help, and it ends up falling flat and it ends up detracting from the actual work that needs to be done. Speaking of people doing the most, there has been a rash of really, really strange, I'm with you type of actions. There was a challenge going around that if you support Black Lives Matter as a white woman, shave your head. So, shave your head for BLM was a hashtag, or go bald. Actually, it was go bald for BLM was a hashtag as a way for women to show that they were allies with the Black Lives Matter. Um, Nobody, and I'm going to repeat that, nobody asked for that. Nobody. And that's a crazy thing, right? And so now you have all of these crazy stuff popping up. It's like, oh, here's the way that I am supporting the Black Lives Matter. And there is another one that I saw yesterday, where people are painting their faces darker and wearing wigs to show support for the Black Lives Matter. That's called blackface. And that's been a bad thing for many generations. And it is a absolute, and so I'll tell you this right now. I am almost 100% sure that the people who are doing it, because I saw one where half the woman's face was one color and the other half was her natural skin tone, and I'm almost 100% sure that the people who are doing it are think that this is actually a way that they're showing their support for people of color in this country. And it is completely missing the mark. It is completely missing the mark. And so part of it might be on the Black Lives Matter piece, where it's like, oh, well, we haven't put out a whole list of things like, here's how you can help. And I think it also might be on people who are really afraid of doing anything really substantial, and not doing the research, because, believe it or not, there actually are lists of here's what you can do as a white person, as an ally, to help along this movement. Like, number one, challenge racism when you see it and when Black people are not around. That's a big thing, right? There's an old saying that's like, I judge you on your character. I judge your character on what you do when you think nobody's looking. Right. So if there are no Black people around and you are not challenging Black lives, you're not challenging racism when you see it, then all of this is for naught. Right. Because I can take care of it when I see it. I need you to take care of it when your peers or people who look like you and people who think that they think like you, when they do certain things, I need you to step up and say those things and challenge it. And so those are the things that you can do. Their influences or claim to be, yeah. So I'm just reading some of your notes, and this is this is simple stuff, right? Simple stuff. Like, don't paint your face to, say that you are in support of Black Lives Matter. That doesn't make any sense to us, right? I'm not going to look at that and go, it's like, oh, okay, you get it. I'm going to look at you and go, you absolutely do not get it. 100% you don't get it. And so, again, you're starting to see all of these things that are starting to crop up, and there's real work to be done, right? So, again, the congressmen are putting forward this bill. Hopefully it's going to pass through Congress, mostly liberal Congress that we have right now. What you can do is that when it gets to the Senate, you can call your senators, both of them, and say, if you don't pass this bill that the Senate, that Congress has passed and has put on your desk, we're not going to vote you in November, or we're going to vote you out in November. That's what you can do. Don't paint your face, right? If you are interested in helping, when Prop 50, when these racist cops, and not all cops are racist, don't hear me on that one. When racist cops show up in your cities and are running from something that they've done in one city to come to your city because their records don't follow them, you can say, "I need you to take an evaluation," right? Instead of shaving your head. Don't do that. We don't need that. Right? What you can do is have a conversation about what defunding the police looks like. Instead of arguing, it's like, well, I should be able to walk around with a Confederate flag because it represents my history. Yes, a very racist history, a history that was based in I don't want to give up slaves. So you can talk about that, or we can talk about what defunding the police looks like, right? And you're right. Fear does cripple people, and fear does make people, it almost paralyzes their emotions. But it's too late for that. I do not have the time or the disposition to have a conversation about, well, I'm afraid to do that. We've been afraid for 400 years. Now it's your turn, right? It's your turn to take some chances. It's your turn to move that needle. It's your turn to move out there. Um, okay, so I mentioned defund the police a couple of different times, and so one of the problems with the actual term defund the police is that it gets conflated with get rid of the police. I'm going to sit up here. I'm going to be the first person to tell you that I do not want to get rid of the police. That makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that people think that we're asking for people to get rid of their police departments is indicative of the fact that people think that we are unintelligent in what we need in order to be better, to make this world better. People think that we're dumb. It has to be. Because why would we say get rid of the police? When my house gets broken into, I need a policeman to come take care of that, right? If I'm walking down the street and somebody mugs me, I want a police person to go get them. You know, I think that there is a absolute and I here's how I think I need to. This is where the red herring comes in, right? So when you say defund the police, right? If you say I want to defund the police and somebody's like, "Oh, they want to get rid of all of the police officers." No, that's not what I said. When I say Black Lives Matter, well, all lives should matter. No, that's not what I said. When I kneel to protest police brutality in this country, and people's like, "Oh, well, you're disrespecting the anthem and the flag." That's not what I said. And these are all red herrings. These are all. Be very, very, very clear that none of the people who are asking for, who are saying these things that are contrary to what we put out as our statements, be very clear. They're not confused on what we're saying. They're saying these things to discredit what we're saying. And so when you stop down and try to explain why it's Black Lives Matter and not all lives matter, you've already fallen into the trap. They already know why Black Lives Matter should mean, what Black Lives Matter means, and why Black lives should matter, right? It has nothing. They are not under the guise that, oh, well, you must be mistaken. You really should say that all. No, that's not what they're saying. They are absolutely trying to derail your thought. They're absolutely trying to move. And all the time that you spend trying to explain why the Black Lives Matter or why the kneeling is in protest to police brutality and not the flag, or why defund the police is not about getting rid of police forces, you've fallen into the trap. And we need to stop. We need to absolutely stop having the rhetoric out there, or spending time really talking about this rhetoric, and just really move the needle. So back to defunding the police. So defunding the police simply means we have put in an inordinate amount of money into police forces across the country, because we have asked police officers to be everything in our society. If there is a mental health issue in a community, who do we call? Not a social worker, not a mental health. We don't call the hospitals where they can send out a mental health professional to assess the situation. Who do we call? we call the cops. When there is a cat in a tree, we don't call, you know, we call the cops. When there is all of the issues that should not be on the laps of the police officers are squarely on the laps of the police officers, and they are not being allowed to do their job. In fact, all we're doing is pumping more money into the police forces to hire more people so more people can do the jobs that they are not supposed to be doing. That's the problem. And the problem is that when we start to look at how much money is being put into these police forces, it is a ridiculous amount of money, right? And so when we start to look at, well, how much money the police department got as opposed to the education department, and the conversation is, well, we have to have a policeman in certain high schools. Well, no, fund the education system. Right? When you fund the education system, they can take care of themselves. And you don't have to have policemen in the schools. That's one aspect of taking money out of the police budget and putting it somewhere else in the community. Fund community programs so there aren't that many crimes anymore. So we don't need this many policing. We don't need this much policing. You can also take money out of the police budget and fund mental health initiatives in all of the cities because they have been sorely underfunded. And all we do is call the cops and lock these people up with people who don't have mental issues, and they're not getting the services that they need because the services are not available. We should be demanding additional funding for social services and raising importance of those services. That's exactly the point, right? But we can't do that if we keep on putting more and more money into the militarization of police forces across the country. There are small towns in Iowa that have tanks. Tanks. What do you need a tank for? You know, so I somewhat understand why we have how highly militarized police force we have in New York City, because we have been the subject of many terrorists and when I say terrorists, both international and domestic terrorists. We've been a subject of attacks. So we need a police force that is nimble enough and is strong enough to bolster against that. But why do you need a tank in a small town in Iowa? Right? And it's just because people have used the politics of fear and the rhetoric of fear to make people think we need this stuff. We need to have riot gear in this small town in Wisconsin. We need to have tanks and helicopters in this really rural community in North Dakota. Why? Right? Why? And the problem is that the police unions all across the country do not want to go backwards, right? Once you've had a certain level of funding, the last thing that you want to do is say, well, let me give you some of this money back, right? And the police unions are strong. The police unions all across this country are strong. There are very few mayors that ever get elected, and very few politicians that ever get elected in New York City that do not have the backing of the police union. And I think that the police union is a necessity, but I also think that they are so strong that they have now become a danger unto themselves. The police union chief was on TV the other day talking about stop treating us like animals and savages. I was like, really? Stop treating you like animals and savages. Got it. Right? And so again, it's this thing where I become so big, I become my own thing that I cannot see the forest for the trees. And there needs to be a large conversation about how these police unions are, how the police unions get, what do you call it? How the chiefs get elected, right? Like, who's in charge of these unions? There was a whole thing about the police chiefs and the police sergeants in the different neighborhoods need to be elected like sheriffs are, right? So if you're in the black community, you better be doing things for the black community, or else you get voted out as the captain of that precinct. That makes sense to me. Right. So these are the things that go into defund the police, right? Nobody's saying that we don't need the police. Nobody is saying that we want to get rid of the police. Everybody is saying is that the police have too much on their plate. And because they have too much on their plate, they don't have time to do proper training. They don't have time to do proper community policing because they're too busy running around in schools with mental health stuff. They're too busy doing all the things that policemen should not be doing, right? Yeah, they're all appointed and they should be elected. I absolutely think that they should be elected. Dunn is responding to Dunn over there. So yeah, that's what defund the police looks like. And so that's my take on it. And again, um, when you hear people start to say, "I am, against defunding the police because you want to get rid of the police force," again, it is a red herring. It is all they're really trying to do is get you to move away from having a conversation about what the actual issue is, and they know it. Don't ever feel that you're explaining something to somebody when they come up with all lives matter or they want to get rid of the police force. Don't ever think that you're giving them new information. You never are. It's information they have and they're choosing not to use it so that they can derail your argument. It is a red herring. um so I want to bring Will in, and so if Will is listening, if you can jump in my live, I will pull you in because I want you to listen to the poetry of Will in this moment. He is an amazing poet. Again, like I said, he is a member of Phi Beta Sigma. He is a graduate of Penn State. So any any uh, any Penn State people out there, I had to take a deep breath before I call for Penn State people. But but he is Penn State, and he is also a member of the 100 Black Men. And so there's a lot of things going on with Will, and I'm sure that he can tell you a little bit about that as soon as I pull him in. So hold on. He says, "How do I do that?" Let's see if I can pull him in. I think you have to ask to. You have to ask to join this stream. Hold on, let's see if I can do it on my side. All right. Hmm. Well, you should see something that says, "Hey, I want to join your live stream," and let's see if we can get that going. Not there. All right. Uh, as with anything, there's always these technical difficulties. All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of different things, and I think Will is gonna look to see how he can jump in on the stream, and I'll get back to that. Okay. So one of the things that happened this week, which absolutely tickled, oh, well, actually, two things. And I have to talk about Trump today because I have to. So the thing that came out yesterday and that I have to talk about today, and then I'm going to get past it, but not completely get past it because there is a real insidious nature to it. So on June 19th in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first the first rally that will be held by by Donald Trump will be held in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I can't even get it out because it is really just absolutely disgusting. and it is very, very dangerous. Why is this important? June 19th is Juneteenth, right? And so when you hear Juneteenth, for those of you who don't know, it is a celebration of the abolition of slavery in this country. And people are like, well, what are you talking about? Slavery was abolished in yada, yada, yada. So slavery was abolished by Abraham Lincoln after the war, and the word didn't get to southern states until the next year in June. So I think the decree came about in February or January or something like that, and they didn't get to the southern states. The word didn't get to the southern states until the next year in June. And that's where Juneteenth comes from, which is the day that slavery, the word that slavery was actually abolished, got to the southern states. Why is this important? He is doing his first rally, which will probably be laced with bias and racist rhetoric on Juneteenth. He's also doing it in Tulsa. Tulsa, Oklahoma, for those of you who don't know, is the sign of the Tulsa race riots. And for those of you who are actually in the know, there were never riots. It was a massacre. Tulsa is the site of the Black Wall Street. So those of you who are steeped in history know that Black Wall Street Tulsa, Oklahoma, was a place where black people said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and do our own thing. We're going to go ahead and set up our own towns, our own businesses, and this place thrived. It was so prosperous. People had their own businesses. It was a community that was self-sufficient. They were very much very, very prosperous in everything that they did. And then there was an incident where somebody claimed that a white woman was assaulted, and the race rioters came to Tulsa and massacred people, burned buildings to the ground, and in one day flattened an entire town, burned everything to the ground. And you'll never hear about this in your history books because it was a huge secret until about a couple of decades ago. Nobody even knew that this had happened until the 90s. And so let me rephrase that. Nobody outside of the black community knew that this had happened until the 90s. And so when people started hearing about Black Wall Street and what was going on, people were like, what? Wait, what are you talking about? Even the mayor of Tulsa didn't know that this had happened until somebody had pointed it out to him. And this was a part of our American history that had gone unheralded for many, many years. And so it's a sore spot. Physically and mentally, Tulsa is. Even when you see it depicted in The Watchmen, for those of you who watch Watchmen on HBO, that was one of the most vivid depictions of the Tulsa massacre that I've ever seen. And we're coming up on 99 years after the massacre. And we just passed 99 years after the massacre. And here comes Donald Trump on Juneteenth in Tulsa to have his first rally. It is the most nefarious and evil thing that I have ever heard of in my entire life, right? And so it is, I can't begin to tell you how I felt when I heard that. So in the midst of all of the things that are happening in this country, and in the midst of the vast majority of people saying that this has got to stop, here is the leader of the country. Here is the person who people voted into to be the president of this country saying, I'm going to take it even further. I'm going to race bait even further. I'm going to make this my platform. I can guarantee you he's not getting up on stage and talking about, it's like, you know what, I was wrong. Black lives actually do matter. I'm standing here in historic Tulsa and on Juneteenth in celebration of all my black brothers and sisters. That's not what's going to happen. I swear to God, if that is what has happened, I will take one of my hat, cut them up into little pieces, and eat the entire thing. And if it does happen, 5 minutes afterwards, he's going to say, but what do they need that for? Or whatever his rhetoric is going to be. It is disgusting. And we need to watch this because it will be a dog whistle for all of his supporters that are just waiting for him to say it's okay to fight back from this. It's okay to push back. It's okay to get the guns and the rifles off the back of the pickup trucks and start walking into towns and start going into these protests. They are waiting. And this is not a threat. It is a very serious issue. Right. And so and it was Texas where the slaves were kept in bondage until the mayor read the Emancipation Proclamation, which was issued on January 1st, 1863. Right. And so Tim just gave me some information about Juneteenth. And that's how we got Juneteenth, because it was a whole year and a half later. And so this is an absolute craziness. And so I want everybody to be careful, and I want everybody to be aware of what is happening, because this is not going to stop. The other thing that happened recently was in Buffalo. There were cops who pushed an old man, a 75-year-old man, to the ground while he was standing in protest. Now, admittedly, they were advancing, and he stood there. But he was an old guy. He just stood there, and he was holding up his hand, and they pushed him, and he fell backwards, and he hit his head, and he started bleeding from his head. Any normal human being would have been like, okay, let's stop what we're doing. Let's get this guy some help. Instead, what happened was one person stooped down to actually somebody stooped down to actually help him, and that guy got pushed out of the way. And at least a dozen officers stepped over him. 2 of the officers were suspended for the actions, and right after that, 57 or 59, I forget which the number is, 59 of their fellow officers resigned from the emergency force. There were still police officers in Buffalo, but they resigned from the emergency force in solidarity with the guys that pushed the old 75-year-old man and left him bleeding out of his ear on the ground. They resigned in solidarity with those guys. Immediately after that, a precinct in Florida issued a statement saying that if you want to come to Florida, we will gladly give you jobs for all of you people who have been suspended or have left your jobs in Buffalo. Here is the problem, is that people who are biased and people who are interested in doing these horrible things will always have a place to go, unless we have a system that doesn't tolerate it anywhere. The fact that people in Florida can say it's like, oh, you did this horrible thing? Yeah, don't worry about it. Come over here. We got jobs for you. That's crazy. That's crazy, and another level of despicable, right? Another level of despicable. So those are the 2 things that have happened over the last couple of weeks, over the last week since the last time that we talked. I saw them clap for him. And so it is, again, indicative of the fact that we have a lot of work to do. A lot of people, Tardis asks question, has Kanye made any comments regarding this movement? Thank God that Kanye has been absolutely silent through all of this. We're not going to get into, because I only have a couple of minutes, we're not going to get into all the other people who have also been silent through all of this. There are certain members of the black community who have been silent. There are certain members of the white community. And I'm talking about high-ranking and very visible members of these communities that have been silent, that we have not heard from. I mean, we've heard from Taylor Swift. I was like, what? Taylor Swift getting political? And I do not like Taylor Swift. So, I had to give her a virtual dap, because, I don't have access to her. The officer that pushed the other officer bending down to help immediately called EMS, and it could be argued by the cops that he didn't want to further injure him, but that's besides the point. Yeah, it absolutely is besides the point, because they didn't have to step over him. They could have stopped what they're doing. Is the life of that man who is bleeding as a result of their actions less important than pushing back protesters? I don't think that it is. And so we have a lot of different things. We have a lot of different ways that we can look at it. And yes, I did notice that they were like, all right, push them away and call the EMS. But you are trained police officers. You're all trained police officers, right? And there was no level of care. There was no level of, oh my God, look what we've done. We should stop what we're doing in order to help this guy. Anyway, but that's the whole Buffalo thing. So yes, we have not heard from Kanye, and I am very, very thankful for that, because I have a strange suspicion that his take would be quite problematic, because his takes have been quite problematic. So yeah, so that's the other thing that's been happening. And last but not least, no, actually not last. I have two other things I want to talk about. The other thing that has happened in Washington D.C. is that Trump got his wall. What are my thoughts on General Miley's apologies appearing with Trump when he went for a walk in the church? I'm tired of the apologies. Y'all can have all the apologies in the world. We need action. Everybody does something, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to do it." Like the woman that got slapped in a convenience store for calling, for yelling at a woman about Black Lives Matter. Then her husband came back and says, like, "Oh, I apologize. She had mental issues." Everybody has a comment. Everybody has an issue, right? And so I'm going to try to request Will here. Let's see what happens. Nope, can't do it. Let's see if we do it that way. Nope, can't do that. Well, we're going to fix it, and then we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it next week. All right? I'm sorry about that, dude. And yeah, so like there's a whole list that, the white woman, the white lawyer who spit on a guy and immediately lost her job too. And everybody apologizes. Everybody apologizes. But I just need people to not feel that they can do it to begin with. And that's the issue. People know it's like, all right, I'm going to do this stuff. And if I apologize quick enough, I might be able to avoid the backlash. But I don't have a space for apologies anymore. I just need people to stop doing the evil stuff. But the other thing is that Trump got his wall. There is now a wall around the White House. They have constructed a wall around the White House to keep the protesters away from the commander-in-chief. Great. It is glorious. Here's the other thing. They have now made that wall an art piece. So they've put up all kinds of banners. They have put up all kinds of art, anti-Trump art, anti-this, all the stuff. It is glorious. So now the wall that was supposed to protect the president is now lambasting him on a daily basis. And I am here for it. It is glorious. It is absolutely glorious. Black Lives Matter people was like, oh, so you want to give us a place to put our placards and all the rest of that stuff. Excellent. You should, and I wish I was in DC because I would go by every single day and take pictures of the new stuff that's on that wall. It's great. It's great. And again, it's one of those things that's like, well, here's the reason that we did this, and it completely backfires on them. So, the one thing is like when black people protest, it's a whole kit and caboodle. It's a whole production. And I have two minds about it too, because it's like one thing I want you to stay serious about the message that's being put forward, but seeing people do the wobble in the middle of the street in thousands, I mean, that has to bring that's an example of the joy that we want to bring to this nation. And the fact that people keep on trying to stop us from just living our lives and being joyful is really sad, because if you just let us be great. If you just let us be great, this whole nation would be great. And so I don't know, so go ahead and wobble in the street. But I, 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 sometimes I'm like, all right, but we gotta stay on brand. We gotta stay on the message. But maybe that is our brand, right? Maybe it is part of the joy that we bring. Yes, there is a march on Washington planned in August. I think it's August 28th. And I don't know very much more information about that. But if that happens, then I'm all about going. Beyond the apology itself, I hope it is a signal about Trump losing the ability to use the military for domestic political use. It is not a symbol of that, Dave, because he's going to try to figure out what he will do. So here's the thing, right? So this Juneteenth thing, watch that, because if he mobilizes his base to take action and it starts to become violent in the street, that's the piece that he needs in order to mobilize the military. It's as simple as that, right? So don't get. We want to believe that there is, a swing that, okay, he's realizing that he can't use the military, and his military generals are coming out and calling him divisive and all the rest of that stuff. Don't fall for the okie doke, because what's happening on Juneteenth is very significant, and he knows it. And so let's pay attention. All right, I'm gonna wrap up. Well, we're gonna figure out the whole joining in. I thought it was easy because I used to join in on Vinny's live feed all the time. So we'll figure it out, and we'll get you on next week as well. But before I leave, I wanted to let you know that on Saturdays we do a photography workshop on my Instagram. So if you are interested in photography and you want to hear me talk about photography instead of all of this political stuff, come check me there on Saturdays at 5 o'clock on my Instagram. My Instagram is GLPPICS, and you can check out some of my photography there as well. You can also buy some of my photography at greenlightphoto.darkroom.tech, and I'll put all of this stuff in the comments afterwards so you can check it out. And also, we are going to be doing a bike ride. We're going to be doing a 5-borough bike ride to benefit the United Negro College Fund next year. But I have to start raising money for it. So if you want to help me raise money, eventually we'll get a whole link where you can donate to. But if you want to help me start now, or if you just want to leave a tip because you got something interesting out of any of this stuff, feel free to hit my Cash App up. It is $ Hayden M Greene, and that's an E at the end of Greene. Like I always say, if you get a tip, leave a tip. But here's the moment that I have been waiting for. I hope some other people have been waiting for as well. The performance of my latest piece, which is called Zoom America. So imagine that all of America was invited to a Zoom to talk with black people about how we solve some of these problems. So here's Zoom America. America was called to a Zoom call this week to discuss race relations in this country. Black people called the meeting to get the bottom of what is wrong with America today. Everyone had an opinion on what should be done. Most of them had advice for the oppressed, but not the oppressors. Black people put everybody on mute. Allies kept popping into the room and then leaving. The camera was on sometimes, but it was frequently off, especially when the topic of challenging their friends who are biased came up. Religious leaders sat themselves across the room from their cameras and were praying the entire time while sitting on golden chairs. The media showed up with a flashy virtual backdrop, and they wanted to know if they could record the meeting, but they could only see 3 people at a time on their screen, though. Weird. Politicians joined late and immediately started sharing their screens with a PowerPoint on their political platform that still didn't address the lives of black people. Liberal white women came on and said all the right things and nodded supportively, all while emailing the Zoom service to let them know that the black people were using the N-word with an ER. They failed to mention that it was while the black people were describing what the police had called them. Plenty of racists joined the call, but their cameras are off, so we didn't know who they were. Just then, gay black people Zoom bombed the call and reminded everybody that after y'all did get done fighting for cisgender black folk, we need to talk about gay trans black people and fight for them too. And then they went to sit in a room that kind of looked like the same room that the religious leaders were sitting in. Strange. The youth of the nation were frustrated by the whole affair and could be seen Snapchatting on their phones. Exasperated with the platitudes, they typed in the chat bar, "We need y'all to figure this out so we can move the country forward after y'all done dead." The police signed into the meeting and sat so close to the camera that all you could see was their eye. Every now and again, they would yell out that the country would fall into anarchy without them, completely out of context. Black people had had enough of the rhetoric. They put everybody on mute again. Can any one of you tell me real changes that you're going to start making to solve this problem beginning tomorrow? There were shrugs. Lips were moving. No words could be heard. Black people said, "You need to unmute yourself. Religious leaders, you need to unmute yourselves. We can't hear you. Liberal white women, you need to unmute yourselves. Allies, you need to unmute yourselves. All of you need to unmute yourselves." And just like that, the connection died. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been the Greenhouse Effect. I want to thank you for hanging with me and being part of the crew and being part of the collective. Again, there's so much to be done and there's so much that can be done. Find your corner of the world, change it, make a difference, go out and be great. And I just want to, again, say that we will be here again next week. And thank you for supporting me and enjoy the rest of your week. Go play yourself a Prince song.